Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. It's my great pleasure to first welcome. We have a lot of guests here. We have individuals from hospital, representing the hospital. We have individuals representing both GDC Board of Directors and our Foundation Board, as well as Economic Development Partnership Alliance guests here. So really pleased to see all the different partners and friends that are here with us here today. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Grace Terrell. Several of us went over to Hudson Alpha several months ago for a genomics medicine conference and had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Terrell speak. And Mike Reeves turned to me and said, we need to get her to Greenwood. So we were able to accomplish that. Just a little brief background. She was born in Siler City, North Carolina, which Andy Griffith fan will remember is supposedly the home place of Aunt B. She was originally there, and but Grace was from there. Grace went to UNC Chapel Hill. She was a Morehead Scholar there, actually in English and religion, and also has a Master's of Medical Management from Carnegie Mellon, as well as a PhD from Duke University. She went on to get her training in internal medicine, and then started a multi-specialty, clinic at, I don't know if it was a High Point or High Point, North Carolina, which called Cornerstone Health, which grew from 7 positions to 42 positions, up to 375 positions before she moved on. She also developed a population health management company called Chess, which has now been acquired by LabCorp and Wake Forest. But I was reading her bio, which she's now the CEO of Envision Genomics, and so I thought this bio was very appropriate for what we're doing every day. So Envision Genomics is a company helping clinicians diagnose rare diseases through the integration of genomic data into clinical care. Kind of sounds like what we do every day here and have been doing for quite a while. So I felt like it was very appropriate for her here for input on this. And she's focused on the integration of precision medicine technology and population health into a population health framework for patients with rare, misdiagnosed, and undiagnosed disorders. Something also we do on a daily basis. So hopefully she can help us understand and learn a little bit on that. And what I think is probably interesting is that Envision Genomics, they have the goal to improve, called the triple aim, which I guess is the rare, misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, aimed by 100-fold. So it's a pretty ambitious goal, and we hope that we can be part of that process making it happen. So she's a national thought leader in healthcare innovation and delivery, and we're very fortunate and glad that you're here to share this message with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I think that's the first time I've ever been actually introduced where it started with Siler City. That was awesome. As I was telling Steve, one of my first memories in life was sitting on my granddaddy's lap in Siler City. He was the sheriff there, really. And we were watching the Andy Griffith show and thought that end of the show, there was something said about that he was going to go visit the sheriff of Mount Pilot in Siler City. Of course, that was Pilot Mountain, and Mount Airy was where Andy Griffith was from. And then the Siler City was just related to the fact that that's where Francis Bouvier, who played Aunt B, retired to. But I thought that he was coming through the door that day. So he didn't. But anyway, that's cool that you snuck that in somehow. I don't know. You must have really been digging around when you started on the internet or something. Anyway, I have really been looking forward to talking to all of you all this morning about what's gotten me excited. I was able to be part of the staff meeting this morning and then hear a brief lecture by Dr. Wu, and I had an immediate case of imposter syndrome. because I saw real geneticists, real clinical geneticists, doing their work and thinking very deeply at the scientific level about what I am going to talk about now, which is where I think the world is going. But I myself am not a clinical geneticist. I did last year go back. I do still practice regular old primary care internal medicine. Go back to High Point and do that 3 days a month now. But it's it's the usual kind with Hondas. You know what a Honda is? Anybody? The hypertensive, obese, non-compliant diabetic adult. In my clinical life, I'm mostly a Honda, which is the opposite of what you all do every day, which is rare disease. But probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story about why I am where I am now, why I'm passionate about it, and why you all are getting ready to be the leaders of what's going to be the most radical transformation in healthcare, I believe, in our lifetime. If you're ready for it, it's going to just be a heck of a lot of fun. So I want to make sure that we are able to think about this very comprehensively. So there's not going to be any talk about exomes or genomes or microarrays or any of that jazzy business, because any of you all in the room that are from the world of genetics can out talk very quickly about all that. Instead, I want it to be about what I believe is true for almost every clinician I've ever met, really about the patients. And sometimes as our healthcare system has evolved, we forget that. So one of the things that I have done in my organization at Cornerstone in the past and Chess, and we're trying to do this now with Envision as well, is start with a patient story. So the patient story I want to tell this morning is a very brief one where I was in medical school at Duke, and this is 1985 or 6. I'm just on some of my first clinical rotations. And Dr. Eugene Stead, who was just a real, one of the first leaders in internal medicine, had just semi-retired. He was taking us around on rounds, and everybody there was scared of him, including the dean and everybody else. And we came across somebody with a black hairy tongue or a white hairy tongue. I can't remember which. They both exist clinically. And nobody knew what it was or what caused it. It ultimately was probably a manifestation. This was the age of AIDS, and it was just coming into our consciousness. There was no cure. Everybody was quite frightened about it. But one of the things that was said, because we didn't know much about it, was, well, just when you don't know something, just and the patient asks you, just say, we see this something. Have you ever been told that by a doctor? Maybe they have no idea what's going on. And unfortunately, that really bugs me, because that's really not what healthcare is about. You probably had to say that quite a bit if you're at the Clinical Genomics Center in Greenwood, South Carolina, Genetics Center, because probably do see some things that you've never seen before. So we've got the opportunity now to think medicine in ways that will change that. I have to give a statement of conflict of interest, basically saying that these are all my opinions, and nobody that you've heard my introduction believes this or represents this. This is just me talking. I am on something called the Physician-Focused Technical Advisory Committee, which is a FACA committee from Congress that basically is looking at new ways of paying physicians. So anything I say here has nothing to do with that, okay? Really. So how did I get here? Well, in about 2011, I was invited to Huntsville, Alabama, to the Hudson Alpha Institute with 7 other people. Jim Hudson was one of them. I was one of them. It was the CEO of Allscripts Electronic Health Record, a woman named John Callan, who runs a evidence-based medicine clinical integration process. There was a guy who was CEO of Trizetto, which was part of the claims work engine underneath the Blue Cross claims system. A guy that now is the CEO of one of the genomics companies at Hudson Alpha that is sold for $1 gazillion based on microbiome research, and me. And I was really the only clinician there, but for whatever reason, a couple of consultants from the Oliver Wyman healthcare consulting group had decided they wanted to start an innovation group, and they thought that the 8 of us would be people to sort of be the think tanky types. Well, I was a practicing dental internist who ran a multi-specialty group, so I really felt a little bit different than the rest of these folks. Jim Hudson, as you all probably know, those of you that are from the genetics world, is the one who was the benefactor of the Hudson Alpha Institute, one of the two, after selling his business called Research Genomics, which was a lot of the technology behind the Human Genomics Project. So it was that kind of people there in me. Well, the reason I was there is because I was the poster child for what they were calling Wave 1 of what were going to be the 3 major waves of change over the next 15 years in healthcare. And a lot of the things I was doing at Cornerstone Healthcare at the time were ahead of the time. We were one of the first in the EHR. I was the first medical home in North Carolina. We ended up doing a lot of what was called value-based contracting, lowering the cost of care. Wave 2 was supposed to, so Wave 1 was supposed to have started in about 2010 and crest by, say, 2014. Wave 2 was supposed to start about 2013 and really crest and start, leaving by 2017, 18. And then Wave 3 was supposed to start around 2018. So this was 7 years ago, and we were talking about Wave 3. And I'll give you a little detail and more details to what those things were. Well, Wave 1 was about the concept that healthcare was going to be moving from a provider-centric to a patient-centric focus, and it was going to be much more about convenience and about teams of care. So in retrospect, accountable care organizations, convenience care clinics, patient-centered medical homes, smart care teams, telemedicine, many of these things now that we take for granted, they may not have ideally turned out the way we thought, but this was sort of what we thought was going on. And because I was from that world, and was maybe considered an innovator in some of that, that's why I was at the table. Well, the second wave was they gave us all Fitbits before they came on the market. We were walking around with us now counting our steps. The second wave was about the consumer movement in healthcare. And so one of the other people there was a guy named Peter Hudson. He was an ER doctor that was working on, sort of apps for the iPhone. It was called iTriage. He sold it for several $1 million a few years ago to Aetna. It's now part of anywhere in the country. You can go on that app, and if you're sick, it's sort of a halfway diagnosis. You can tell you got to go to the ER or who the local folks are. You can download it yourself. But many of the things that we were just talking about then are now just a standard of care, really. Cardia is I don't have my cardio watch on right now on my Apple Watch, but you can do a really, really good single lead EKG on that and get an answer and an interpretation back within about 3 minutes from the cloud. It's a consumer product. It doesn't require a physician. And it can be used to actually send information to your clinician in a way that's probably a lot cheaper and just as accurate as a Holter monitor if need be. So a lot of these things were things that we were thinking about then, including population health management, shared decision making. For those of you from the hospital world, you know that these are now things that we're all dealing with. But I couldn't get this Wave 3 thing at all. So Jim Hudson, who's a genius, was talking about this world where there was going to be whole genome sequencing. It was just going to be it was going to be inexpensive, and they were talking about it as the science of prevention and big data and digital doctors in the future. And I didn't quite understand it all. It was a little bit above and beyond my scope of what the future was, but we were thinking about this in great detail. And interestingly, it was going to start about 2018. And think about where we are right now with genetics in the world. So you all have been in this space for a long time here in Greenwood, but the rest of the world is now starting to think about it in very, very different ways. So are we really ready for this Wave 3? Are the providers of healthcare ready for it? Well, most evidence-based medicine practice guidelines that are out there have not been developed yet for most of the genetic testing that we use. And as many of you all would know here, a lot of it is still very early in development. The AMA did a survey not too long ago of about 10,000 physicians, and very few of clinicians out there thought that they were ready for anything related to integrated genomics into their medical practice. Another to a year ago, I would certainly have been one of those had I been given that survey. There's about 75,000 now. This slide's a little out of date. Genetic tests on the market. That's really difficult, other than for those of you in this room, perhaps, who do this every day, with respect to how that's going to be integrated. And there's only 1,000 clinical geneticists in the U.S. and only 2,000 genetic counselors. So with the advent of the time of genetic medicine, how in the world are we going to practice it? Is pharma and biotech ready for it? I mean, they're certainly putting a lot of money into it. Well, it really changes everything about their business model. Blockbuster drugs were based on everybody being the same. And genetics is about how people are different. And that's going to change the way clinical trials are conducted. If you paid attention to the news over the weekend, you're starting to see how that might impact things when you read the story about how many women now with early breast cancer, if they get genetic testing or biomarker testing, are not going to have to necessarily undergo chemotherapy at that stage. Well, that's great news for those patients. Maybe it's great news for the companion diagnostic test, but it's not great news for the pharmacy companies that have been selling mass marketing, if you will, based on just average folks and staging. Well, are the payers ready for wave 3? Any of the clinical geneticists here want to answer that for me? The answer is absolutely not. And I spent a lot of time last year talking to them, and they don't know what to do about all these 75,000 tests. There's only a few CPT codes to cover. They don't know what to cover. They don't know what to charge it, and they're still thinking in unit cost as opposed to total cost of care. And they tend to be a little bit behind diagnostically with what they're considering evidence before they cover things. You know, they're not understanding the new ways of doing things. Are policymakers ready? Well, I don't think that anybody thinks policymakers are ready for anything anymore. But genetic data is really going to have all sorts of implications. When you think about it at the individual level, we just think about the case in California last month or the month before that, where they solved the case, Ancestry.com type, DNA information, the privacy issues, the issues related to making sure that people are able to have data but not discriminated against. All these things are going to be really, really crucial to us getting the benefit out of it. Well, you might not be ready for it, but the trouble with change usually arrives before you're ready for it anyway. So let's get ready. Here it comes. This is what has happened, if you want to think about it, in healthcare over the last 120 years in terms of change. In the year 1900, life expectancy was 47, and the healthcare system was mostly about taking care of acute illnesses and not terribly effective. So people were worried about things like influenza, tuberculosis. People still died of massive numbers from diarrhea back then. Pneumonia still took most people around. Well, by the 1950s, that was still going on. We were building hospitals, had antibiotics, but we were starting to see chronic disease being more important, with heart disease, cancer care, cerebral vascular. Well, we did some pretty incredible things over the last generation that helped much of that. So by 2000, it was much more about chronic disease and how to manage that. A lot of the things that I have done over the course of my healthcare career with those upon us has been about managing chronic disease, and that's what a lot of our problems. Well, I would say that in 2020, what we're getting ready to do with genetics is going to be prevention. And it's going to be, for the first time, basically being able to predict disease at the unit or individual level and come up with ways of proactively treating it and diagnosing it. And that's a very, very different world if we're able to get there. And the future that I'm essentially an existentialist. I believe you make your own future. If you just let it happen to you, that's called the default future. And there's no point in having a default future. That's why we were made as human beings, and so we could make our own future. And this is the opportunity that you all have here. Well, the thing that's got me passionate about genetics is it's refocusing healthcare on the individual. Population health, a lot of the policy work over the last few generations has all been about populations, these average people. But it's always been, for those of us who practice medicine, about the patient that's in front of us at the time, right? So here's somebody 2,000 years ago who basically said, hence indeed is the developing talent of the medical man, his perseverance, his skill in diversifying the treatment and conceiving such pleasant things. So it was about his skill in diversifying treatment. Claude Bernard in the 19th century said a physician is not a physician to living beings in general, not even to the human race or populations, but rather to a human individual with certain conditions peculiar to himself. Tinsley Harrison from Emory, the real hero of my generation in internal medicine, said the patient is no mere collection of symptoms, signs, disordered functions, damaged organs, disturbed emotion. He is human. And then just last year, someone named Frederick Rickman said making sure that the patient gets the right care in the right place at the right time could not be a clearer set of aims. And those are the triple aims that Steve was talking about earlier. This is really what medicine is supposed to be about. The thing that's so fascinating about clinical genetics is they've always been about this at the unique clinical human individual patient in front of them level. But that part of the language is something that the rest of healthcare has not been talking about for a while. So, what we've been calling this triple aim now, the right patient, the right time, the right place, is really a change in that relationship between the physician and the traditional one of the physician with the individual. So, as we're thinking now in terms of stratifying patients with respect to their risk from those that are healthy, those with early chronic, those with late chronic, those at end of life, we're coming up with organized ways of thinking about populations of patients. But we need to do that and still think about the individual. So a lot of the work that I did when I was at Cornerstone Healthcare was in that way, and that we were doing work around particular populations of patients. One was frail elderly, one was those with heart failure, those with cancer. We had one that was just for Medicaid, Medicare dual eligible. We were creating new models of care. And so in a lot of ways, this was thinking about highly tailored care to individual populations of patients, and we were redesigning the way we did it. So we put a psychologist in our heart failure clinic because the number one cause of readmission to the hospital, if you've got class 4 heart failure, it's not heart failure, it's depression. And we did things like adding some literacy stuff in our dual eligible clinic. For our polychronic clinic, we had a social worker embedded with an internist as well as care coordination. So these are the types of things that we've been thinking about the last few years. And what's mostly been going on with healthcare in terms of what we're calling managed care is using these types of interventions to save money and presumably to increase quality. I said that we're going into the age of prevention. If you look at this data, which came from Geisinger, which is a health system, a medical group, and they have their own insurance company and hospital, they were able to do a lot to lower the cost of care. And they found that just within a few months, just having some transitional care management, they could really get an impact within just a few months. It would take a couple of years of the types of things related to efficiency within the system to have an impact. And some of the things that they did related to prevention took 3 to 5 years. The reason they were able to do that is that they were the insurance company and they had most of the population in the area that they had. But there has not been up until now ways of thinking about the prevention, particularly in the way that we might with genetics. And the type of methodology that we've been using to understand quality, to understand everything in healthcare, it's really been 20th century math. It's been based on the old bell curves and trying to get people from adverse variation and really try to see how everybody is the same or to get processes the same. When you think about Lean, Six Sigma, all of those, it's about narrowing things. Sometimes it's about redesigning things, but it's still about a bell curve and measuring what is different from someone that's average or some process that's average, and how can we make it get back to that mean. That's the opposite of what we do as clinicians. It's the opposite of what mostly happens in genetics. It's also true for the insurance and payment system in healthcare. So what we've got with the way the 20th century healthcare system has been paid in this country, really others as well, even if they're more of a socialistic model, is to essentially try to understand actuarial risk, which is looking at those bell curves, trying to figure out what to do about the variations on the end for which you can cover your costs in terms of the trend model. 20th century math. Well, that's all getting ready to change. When you think about the type of data and information that's out there now as it relates to everything from the 3.2 billion base pairs that we've got within the context of the genetics for individuals and the 5 million variations from the library human genome, when you think about the social determinants of health, the big data, the artificial intelligence, this is going to disrupt healthcare ecosystems and those 20th century averages and how that will impact business models in ways that really our healthcare ecosystem is not ready for. Amazon knows it. Berkshire Hathaway knows it. These companies that are looking for their next big market know it. The annual $7 trillion healthcare worldwide economy, the belief is that they can take out about $3 trillion of it, basically disrupting the current healthcare pathways. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing so long as we make our own future and think about what precision medicine is and what we're going to be able to do with the new technology in ways that can be far more patient-centered. So precision medicine is going to enable better diagnostics, the ability to find something sooner at birth, perhaps, to make diagnoses, to stop diagnostic odysseys is going to be crucial. It's going to improve therapeutics. The example I gave earlier was just an early one, just with oncology this week. It's going to actually greatly improve prevention because we will be able to start thinking about life planning early on based on genomics and then adding other sources of data as well as the social determinants of health. So we could completely transform healthcare in ways that would be better. Health systems, healthcare organizations in general that are worried about what their future might be, there's just several things that are all in common that need to occur. There has to be scale. That's why everybody's merging. Ultimately, there will need to be risk adoption, patient engagement in new ways, strategic partnerships. Everybody's partnering with everybody. Value-based care delivery will be about not just the fee-for-service, doing the right thing, but technology and infrastructure advancements is going to continue to be a huge piece of that, including what happens right here, including the way that information will be integrated across the system. So about 3 or 4 years ago, the Institute of Medicine put out a book called Improving Diagnosis in Healthcare. I don't know if any of you have really been aware of this. It's almost like a part of that healthcare crossing quality chasm system. And this particular book says we have been doing a terrible job of diagnosis. It's not about a particular test or a particular algorithm, but rethinking how we might do things better for great improvement. What will happen with precision medicine, with the type of information integration that we're going to get, has the capability of doing that. Well, predictably, the industry's response to this has been pretty slow to understand the implications. There's just too much data. Do I have any pediatricians in the audience? Okay, what's the X-ray picture? It's called a babygram. Okay, so when I was in med school at Duke, rotating through pediatrics, the test of shame was the babygram. So what would happen is it would be some poor pediatric intern in the middle of the night with a sick baby in the NICU. They didn't know what to do with that sick baby, and so they would just X-ray the whole baby. And it was called a babygram. And so the next day they would just get completely scolded by the attending. These are the old days. I don't know if they do that anymore. And it was a point of humiliation if you ordered the babygram, but they all did it. And the reason they all did it is because they didn't know what was going on, and they were doing a shotgun approach. Precision medicine is not a babygram, but that's what the payers think it is. That's what many people think it is, which is, if you're thinking about whole genomic sequencing, which my company has the ability to do right now, cheaper than an exome, by the way, then the fear of the payers is that what we really have is a multi-$1,000 babygram. They don't understand that what we're really doing is completely disrupting the diagnostic process. When we redesign our new technologies, medicine's going to return to its core mission of refocusing to the individual from the averages. And it's not a babygram that we're developing in genomics. It's actually going back to understanding the individual at a very, very deep level and having insight that can make a great difference. So, I think every physician out there knows that every day we see patients that just don't fit in these neatly little stratified categories we've all been dealing with, right? This is the essential practice of medicine. It's looking at the patient in front of you. It gets back to our roots of who we are, and I think if we now can use some of our new technologies to really think about individuals again, it's really going to also get rid of a lot of the physician burnout and dissatisfaction that we've had right now. Because a lot of what we're having to go through in medicine right now is related to the fact that we've got to take a patient in front of us who's different and make them look like an average person in terms of evidence base, and make them, and not really pay attention to their differences, but pay attention to how we can check some boxes about the fact that we've done everything the same for everybody. And most of that stuff we ought to be able to do and should be doing, and that information is important to collect, but it's also important to understand that we've got to really get back to understanding what an individual. The Institute of Medicine's focus on the diagnostic process, if you look at the things that they say, and this slide may be a little small for you all to read, it's about teamwork and healthcare professional education and diagnosis specifically. Many other things, but a lot of it is about an information integration system as part of the diagnostic process that needs to be reworked at the system level. What will be going on in genetics and genomics, what will be going on with whole genome sequencing, whole exome sequencing, integrating that into other pieces of phenotypic data, electronic health records, will completely change the way we've been diagnosing all these years. I heard it this morning. I heard y'all doing what I do too, is you get a story of a patient and you think about what they might have, and then you do a test. I think that's what it is. And if that's not it, you do another test, and then you do another test. That's what we've all done. And you do the same thing with therapeutics. Once you think you've got your diagnosis, you say, well, let's try the most average thing. Well, that didn't work. Let's try the next one. That didn't work. Let's try the next one. That's the way we've been practicing medicine. That's what it's called, practice. And that's why it's called practice in many respects. It's because we take our knowledge, our wisdom, our training, and try to do pattern recognition and figure out what's best. But we've been doing it with pretty lousy data. And now we're going to be able to have data at a massive different level than we've ever known before. So I just got my pharmacogenomic testing done. For me, I've had my whole genome sequenced as well. And I know that for me, if I was to be on any category of, if I had to have any surgery or anything, probably most of the opiates wouldn't work for me. I haven't ever had to have very much of that. By the time or two where I've had surgery, they didn't seem to work. And imagine in the future if that type of testing is just routine or known, and from the very beginning, we do the right thing. That same category talked about which antiarrhythmics, which depression medicines. The pharmacogenomics that is out there right now that's not being utilized by clinicians could already make a great deal of difference. So the appropriate integration of genetic testing into the diagnostic process is going to really be partly what is going to allow these new Institute of Medicine goals to occur, particularly in cases with rare and idiopathic disease. That's what you all have been doing here for a long time. But we're now going to have different levels of information, and your diagnostic precision is going to be going way, way up. Presumably, if you're part of a linked network of information with respect to therapeutics and others that are around the world doing the same thing, then our ability to actually make real changes very, very quickly, the therapeutic level will go. Who are the hospital folks in the room? Okay. So this is the money slide for you. And I don't mean money. I mean, this is really important to understand because this is how healthcare has been, the business model behind it, the one that we've had, the one that we say that we're going to, I went forward, and the one that we're going to now with precision medicine. So if you think about what volume-based healthcare is, the reimbursement may be fee-for-service, DRGs for hospitals, case rates. You may get some penalties for readmits, but it's really about unit pricing. So the organizational model is around departments, and the value drivers are volume. This is what everybody keeps criticizing, but that's truth. Efficiency is at the procedure level. So if you're doing if you're a cardiologist and you're doing some cardiac cath procedure, the efficiency at the procedure level and how efficient you can do that is really the economic unit. And so your profit pools are based on admissions and discharges for hospitals, is based on ancillary services, surgical procedures, and number of visits. When I ran a multi-specialty group, we measured, other than the hospital things, all these things on a regular basis. And you invest in capacity, okay, because it's the number of units that you can efficiently go through and do. And so you invest in patient referrals, which is why if you're a hospital system, this day and time, you buy up primary care. You invest in revenue-producing assets that relate to individuals. Everybody says we're going to this value-based world. I spent a lot of my time when I was at Cornerstone being an early one in this world. The reimbursement may be about pay for performance. It may be shared risk, shared savings payments. Many of us are going through that. The organizational model is these populations. It's about conditions. It's about, for some of the hospitals, it's about focused factories. By that, it means maybe you want to be the best place in the world to do hips and knees. You're a hips and knees factories, and you're going to get all the cases, and then that will be a volume work for you, but then nobody else anywhere else is going to be doing hips and knees. It's not going to be the general hospital approach necessarily. So the value drivers are efficiency at the population level. That's why we're trying to get everybody to average and not worry so much about those and get the variations out. And quality measures are about processing. It's about, okay, did you check their feet? Did they get their eye exam? Did they get their vaccines? And the profit pools change. So suddenly chronic condition management becomes a profitable thing to do as opposed to, oh my goodness, let the internist that person. Because if you can manage chronic disease inexpensively, you can do very well. And there's a lot of companies out there investing in that. And then your investments are in clinical integration and commercialization of some of that, healthcare IT, and that's where a lot of the investments have been over the last 10 years in electronic health records, as well as integration of health systems across the units of services. Precision-based reimbursement economics is an entirely different thing. You will potentially be in alternative payment models based on outcomes. Organizational model will be around care models, consumer and patient engagement. The value drivers will be efficiency at the individual patient level. It gets you back to the patient. So it's an N of one from an analytic point of view, and the quality outcomes should be, the quality measures will be about outcome, not about process. The profit pools are in information management and patient differentiation capabilities. This is really, could be a sweet spot for Greenwood Genetic Center, okay? If you're able to actually do a better job for differentiated patients than somebody who's just, lumping them into an average, really the variance, that can be an extremely positive from a profitability point of view, but more important, it can be a way of really engaging patients and having a patient mission that is really in a very, very different way than these other models. I suspect in the old world, you all needed to rely on very interesting relationships to cover your costs here. I heard this morning, I know you have a foundation. I know that you have some clinical revenue. You likely have research revenue. In the future, it may be that no one should see anybody with a rare disease except for you all. But it may be that some of your patients are in India or China because you have the expertise, and a lot of it may be done through a telemedicine approach. But it's going to be about the information that you all could develop and have relative to your relative to patients that are different, not the same. And it should be more than just being able to diagnose it, about what can we do about it? How can we find everybody out there with a particular rare disease? So the investment should be in information integration. I was hearing this morning that you all are thinking about that. Predictive analytics, as well as whole person focused design. Got to be about more than just checking the box. This slide here was one that was developed by Harold Miller at the Center for Healthcare Payment Reform a few years ago. And it's the classic model of trying to figure out how we can lower the cost of care. And it's about efficiency at the hospital and specialist and primary care level. I want you to think through this a little bit differently and instead think about your value proposition. What if with whole genome sequencing, if it really were a $1,000 test, maybe once in a lifetime at birth, you could have earlier diagnosis and prevention? What if you could therefore have improved practice efficiency with respect to everything from pharmacogenetics to diagnostic, and a reduction in unnecessary testing and referrals? Notice that that's not at the specialty level in this branch, it's at the primary care. But remember I said that a year ago I didn't know anything about genetics at the primary care level. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to fix that. So that you're the solution for primary care practices or directly to patients all over the country, all over the world, such that the types of things that can allow information at the point of service anywhere can greatly drive efficiency of medicine at the individual patient. So, and the trouble with rare diseases, it's rare, right? Okay, and it's all over the place. We're working right now with a company called Raremark in Europe, and what Raremark wants to do is create social media networks for very specific, very, very extremely rare diseases, like 50 people or less in the world have it. They'll own their own genetic data. They'll sell it when they want to for therapeutic purposes back to pharma or whatever research. But their whole scheme is to use a social media way of finding it all over the world. problem, of course, is that you have expertise here in Greenwood, South Carolina. You're not necessarily connected to rare harm. You ought to be. That's the future we need to build. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of the way that traditional healthcare is going to change. Cardiology right now, it's gone from being a carpenter's disease with bypass surgery to a plumber's disease with stents to an electrician's disease, electrophysiology over the course of my life. It's getting ready to become I said disease, I meant specialty. It's getting ready to become a specialty related to genetics, so it actually may become scientific. We've known for a long time that genetics impact certain things such as certain valvular things, certain congenital heart disease, of course, is well known by everybody. The management of warfarin is a recent example of the way things can potentially be impacted by genetics. But it will increasingly be an early diagnosis and risk stratification specialty. And it may be about a different way of thinking about diagnosis. So it's not going to be about, I got chest pain, let's cath this person, let's put in a stent, or let's do an EP study. It's going to be a bivariate analysis that's going to take some of the clinical information. It's going to have information related to genetic variants. And those two things together, related to phenotypic correlation, is going to create a very, very different way of thinking about it. You all, of course, are familiar with rare disease. This is Nick Volker. He was the child that was diagnosed with sequencing in 2009. The team that I lead were actually the ones that did that. He is, of course, alive as a result of a bone marrow transplant. Now, I believe at age 15, it would not have occurred otherwise, because they would not have necessarily known to do that without making that diagnosis. But it rare disease is not rare. It impacts 20 to 30 million Americans. 80% are genetic in origin. And there's data out there that says 25 to 30% in the past have had to wait 5 to 30 years for proper diagnosis. Among the pediatric population, it accounts for 9 to 12% of all hospital admissions, and unfortunately up to about 30% of deaths in the first year of life. This is the opportunity you all have because it touches every hospital and every specialty, but we currently do a really, really, really bad job taking care of these patients. So a rare disease patient gets conflicting recommendations 60% of the time. They're 6.6 times more expensive to treat on average. And there is a significant amount of inpatient cost as well as care coordinating efforts that are required. There is very few treatments as of yet. About 5% of rare diseases have specific treatments. And most physicians don't have time for this. They can't be bothered with that patient that comes in with all this. This happens to be your mission, but for many people, the current system doesn't serve them well. It's a huge worldwide problem, obviously, but nowhere is it being done well. It may be here. But, you know, it takes about 8 years on average to make a diagnosis, and there's about 8 diagnostic attempts. 30% of children with a rare disease will not live to see their 5th birthday. I'm sure that you all see many of those here. We can change a lot of that by early diagnosis. We can also prevent a lot of unnecessary procedures. And more than anything else, we can create a new model, a new care model for patients with rare disease that is family focused, whole person focused, taking into account more than just the diagnosis. Many of the things you all have been doing here so well across the state of South Carolina with respect to thinking about what their specialties are. Not everybody out there with a rare disease gets to come to a Greenwood Genetic Center. And that needs to change. There's only 1,000 geneticists out there, and we're going to have to come up with new ways of designing it. So I believe that it's going to be based on new ways of paying for this, with new ways of information, and new ways of integrating that information back into systems and directly for patients. There needs to be a digital front door for patients with rare disease, where they don't have to go to their primary care physician. They can figure out how to network with one another, network with you all, find you all. If somebody comes here and you make a diagnosis, but there's one specialist in the world where that happens to be in Toronto, Canada, they need to be networked with you as part of the larger system. So the whole 21st century hope and promise of precision medicine is related to information integration at the behavioral level, the clinical, at the genomic level, at the phenotypic level, and at the social determinants of health and risk level, into creating new models of care. So if you've got information from all these different sources and you keep practicing 20th century medicine, then all of you are, it's just one of these expensive diagrams. But if you can actually take that information, this roughly traditional diagnostic process, think about making it very specific to meeting the needs of individual patients with all of your technology you have. And man, I think that the clinical geneticists could be the leaders, not of the free world maybe, but at least of healthcare and where it needs to go. Because for the longest time, your focus has been on how patients, the individual one in front of you, is different. That's what attracted you to this field. And your day has come. Your day has come. So the 20th century may have belonged to the surgeon and cardiologist. 21st century, should you choose to accept the mission, will belong to you. Well, thank you. That's all I have to say this morning.